Thank you very much for this introduction. So my name is Bruno, and I'll be the moderator today. And I would like to thank West and Elisa for this invitation. So as you've understood, today we'll have a series of presentations and speakers, both in person and online. And the idea behind this panel is to depart from the work of Elisa Caldana, specifically the work that is shown upstairs, but I guess many more things that are not featured directly upstairs, but are part of your research and of the body of work that you've been developing. And start from there to explore other questions that are spanning from the expansion of preconceptions of nature, reflection on different intra and inter relations and kinships between humans and more than humans. Maybe the exploration, also the possibility of the understanding of animals and humans as political companions, among many other questions that we will explore. And we will start with a presentation by Elisa that will maybe go through a little bit about what you can see upstairs, but the background and the process that led up to this exhibition that is still pretty much a very open work and working process that has different iterations also. Currently you are showing it in Helsinki at Sick Gallery in a different edition of the film that you can see upstairs. And we will follow the afternoon through the presentations with the three invited guests that you can see behind me online. So just to repeat the presentation again, philosopher and author Fahim Amir, artist and researcher Gabriel Alonso, and artist, sound designer and researcher Jol Thoms. And each one of them will have 15 minutes to give a short presentation, which I will very carefully nudge when the time is up, so please do collaborate with me. And then in the end, we will have a conversation, and we're trying to make this really more of a conversation and not so much as a fixed formal presentation. So we welcome very much any comments and questions that you might have. And I would also like to urge the speakers, if you have questions and comments towards each other. I know that the online platform sometimes is a bit inhibiting of these cross-pollinations, but well, please feel invited also to ask each other questions. So to kickstart, I will kind of introduce Elisa a little bit and have this a bit always awkward moment of reading Elisa's bio, but I think it's important to contextualize and to set the tone for your presentation, Elisa. So, Elisa Caldana is an Italian artist based in the Netherlands, working primarily with sculpture, performance, film, and writing. It might not be obvious from the show upstairs, but architecture, public spaces, monuments, and collective identity are recurring themes within her work. She's graduated from the Stadtschule in Frankfurt and UAV, University of Venice, and is an alumna of the Jan van Eyck Academie in Maastricht, where we met, and recipient of the Italian Council 12th edition and 7th edition, among other grants. I mean, this could go on, but I will give you the floor now, Elisa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Marie, for the wonderful introduction, and Bruno as well. And thank you, everybody, for being here, despite this beautiful sunny day, and it's lovely that we are all together. Thanks to the guests as well. I look forward to your contribution to the discussion. And actually, let's see. So I have my exhibition upstairs with the works that I have completed until now. And not all of you have seen it, but I would like to start by giving an introduction, a bit of context and storytelling, and talk a bit about how I met the subject of these works, which is a specific falcon. It's called the Lager falcon, although it has different names. It's also called Jagger, Luger, and so on. So this specific falcon is it's considered a minor falcon, and I didn't know about it. I actually first met his story in my hometown in Italy, in the moment in which I met a local falconer. And I was researching about a very specific memory of mine. I will share some images now. Let's see. Where did Zoom go? It's so funny. Like it's like going back to this digital double of me. Or maybe here. So, okay, the image that you see here, it's part of my father's archive, and the man there is my father when he was my age now. Basically, I grew up helping him in a sort of rescue center for birds of prey near the Dolomites in Italy. And we used to take care of wounded and injured birds, and then we used to release them into the wild. And I grew up in this context, and as part of a new work, I was researching this story and trying to contextualize this memory from my childhood and how they can be reactivated or today, like in relation to how we take care of nature today. So I wanted to make a portrait at that time of a falcon, collaborating with a falconer in my hometown. And after our meeting, I asked him, do you work for some conservation project? And he said, yes, I'm working with this network of European falconers, and we are trying to reproduce this lager falcon, which is a small falcon that only exists in Pakistan, India, and Myanmar. But we are trying to reproduce it in captivity here in Europe. And with the idea of creating a genetic pool, and if this falcon in few years would disappear totally from the wild, then we can reintroduce it back into Pakistan. So this story somehow really captivated me because it kind of talks so much about geographical, historical relationship and cultural relationship, and it all gravitates around the figure of this animal. And what this falconer told me is that nobody almost know about this falcon, because even in the falconer community, it is just known as a brown falcon. This is him, although from the projection is not so visible, but yeah. This is part of the shootings that we did in Pakistan. It's actually a falcon which is not that big. It's maybe this high. So it's not considered, it's considered a minor falcon because since it is not that big, it cannot hunt big prey. And it's not so spectacular in the way it hunts. These are also documentation pictures of my travel to Pakistan, because after I heard about this falcon, I was captivated by this story, and I decided to find a way to travel to Pakistan and actually see the bird by myself and kind of build through the process of making an artwork. I wanted to build a relationship with the animal and at the same time trying to come up with a sort of narrative or story or way of portraying the animal as a way to create an image of it, because what I found fascinating it is that it's a bird without a narrative, and it is just known as a minor bird. So in Pakistan, I was able to meet with local falconers there who together we collaborated in the process of making a film. I will show you now some extract of it. And basically what we did is that we rescued 4 falcons in the local animal markets, and we took care of them and released them back into the wild, and part of the work is showing this process. So let me screen a bit of it. Wait, I have to change something here. So I don't know if you can hear me. Okay. So the lager falcon is the first bird that you see in the foreground. The one in the back is a hawk. And so many birds that you saw in the market, they were kites. So let me, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. So basically in the video, in the artwork, as I was telling to Bruno earlier, I didn't want to use voiceover or narrative, at least not yet. And a thing that I'm not doing is, sorry. Okay. So something that I'm not doing yet is using language and using language as a way to categorize the birds or as a way of giving a sort of educational narration and so on. Like I wanted to just show the birds as they are in the context in which they find themselves. And instead I choose to use the sound in a different ways. I collaborated with a composer and a vocalist to create a sort of soundtrack which they used as an occasion to give a sort of sonic identity to the bird. And often, of course, people who see the work ask me, okay, which one is the lager falcon? Because I'm not really pointing my finger to the animal, which I find interesting, like when you just step back and you don't identify the animal. I don't know, it's you start speaking from another position somehow. I don't know, what else should I say? Oh yeah, so in that, let's say, what I did is that through different media, I tried to kind of build an identity of this bird And somehow I also approached it through the lens of my own memory, because I grew up with birds of prey. So I was familiar with birds of prey, but really unfamiliar with this kind of bird. And I used the textile, I used the sculpture, and I used the video as a way of showing the animal, this bird, through different perspectives. In some video fragments, even if the textile, I focus so much on details and on this action of enlarging details, like to see it, what happens when you see it more monumentally, for example, and what happens when you see it in relationship with the humans trying to rescue it. And what happens when you try to use sound to give a voice to it without using language. I mean, I don't know, like, if I should show another fragment of it, because maybe we can talk later about the works or the process behind it. All right. I want to show actually part of it, because it's, well, we can watch it. It's 5 minutes long, it's silent, and it's a new fragment that I did. Let's see.
Wait. Yo, sorry. Oh, yeah. Please.
Yes. Oh, wait. Everybody hears me? Yes. Hello.
All
these beautiful things that you experimented with the birds and that you thought of, and I really appreciate how you connect with them, try to connect with them, try to see what they are doing, and respond to things. How do you relate all these biological things to your art? How does it inspire you? What do you do with that? Combine it.
Okay, thanks for your question. I will play this video while I'll answer to it, because it's a silent one. So it's the first time that I make an artwork with a living being, actually. I tried, although in a very small way, to use the occasion of making a film or the machine of making a film. I tried to use that to give something positive to few of the birds by rescuing them from the market and releasing them. Actually, the whole process of approaching this bird and its story led me to discover a lot of, complications in the attempt itself to try to rescue a bird. It is like as if our intention or our possibility to do something, it's much slower than actually the threat itself, which is endangering these birds. And it feels like there is a real emergency, but it feels that everything is slower. There should be there should be a new law to be introduced, and more education and more care toward these animals. And the video that you are seeing now, it was shot in 60mm film, which is a different type of film than the digital one that I showed before with the market and the flying falcons. In this one, I used the 60mm films because I was able to use the camera myself, and it allowed me to build a more intimate relationship with the falconers. While when we were shooting in the market, we had a crew of about 10 people, which completely changed the relationship we had with the animals. and also with the context itself, it was more, let's say, stressful. And what you are seeing here, it's an old technique of replacing damaged feathers with new ones. In this case, they are adding crow feathers to a sooty falcon. So at the end, we will have a falcon flying with the feathers of a crow. And it's not a painful process because feathers are like nails, or air. And the falcon is actually very calm and quiet. And at the end, we released it, and he was able to fly without problem.
Explain why they're disappearing from the wild.
So the lager falcon itself, it's disappearing from the wild because of several reasons. One is in relation to change of agricultural use and pesticides. And another reason, which is usually the most known, is that this lager falcon is used as a decoy to capture more valuable falcons. So basically, what the traditional trappers do in Pakistan during the migration season, which usually happen in September, October, and November. During this migration season, big falcons like the peregrine or the segue, which are very valuable in the, let's call it, animal market, they fly over Pakistan, and the trappers wait for them in the mountains and throw some decoy in order to capture these valuable falcons. And one of the decoys is this lager falcon. They attach to it a sort of ball of ball of feathers, which looks like prey. And the peregrines or the seekers, they attack the falcon, and they become entangled together. And that's how they capture it. And in the process, most of the time, this lager falcon dies or it's lost. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we unveiled certain operations of the work, but also certain stories and processes behind the making of it. But let's just pause it for a second and complicate things a little bit more. Thank you, Elisa, for the complicate things a little bit more and add more questions and perspectives to the table. And in this respect, I would like to give the floor to Fahim Amir, who is a philosopher and author who lives in Vienna and teaches at universities and art academies in Europe and the Americas. His research focuses on topics of nature, cultures, art, and urbanism, and questions of coloniality, transculturality, and cohabitation. So Hamir's book, Schwein und Zeit, pardon my German, was included in the top 10 best nonfiction books list by Die Zeit and ZDF, and elected as one of the best German books of the year by the Frankfurt Book Fair and Goethe Institute. Congratulations, Amir, well deserved. Amir is a co-editor of the Transcultural Modernism, published by Sternberg Press, and wrote the afterword to the German edition of Donna Haraway's Companion Species Manifesto, among many other endeavors. So I guess just by reading Amir's bio, you see the relevance of having his perspective to this conversation. Fahim, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll pass on the digital mic to you.
Good afternoon. I hope you hear me. It's a pleasure and honor being invited here to speak. And similarly to the start of this afternoon, I will also begin with a more personal, so to speak, approach, coming originally from Afghanistan, where these birds also exist. While in the West, the feminized honeybee became the darling animal of eco-capitalists and the insect mascot of contemporary environmental politics, inheriting a role formerly assigned to dolphins, whales, and turtles of the 1980s, and 1990s environmental campaigns, its metaphorical male counterparts of the feminized honeybee The drones have increasingly been deployed to perform their heroic duty of surveillance and bomb dropping. At the beginning of the third Christian millennium, the enabler of life and the harbinger of death seemingly belong to the same species. And this intermingling of materiality and metaphoricity, and this dimension will guide my reflections. As an official website of the United States Air Force allows us to know, at least one Lager Falcon was employed at the Manas Air Base in Kyrgyzstan to scare off other birds that could complicate the starts and landings of military vehicles heading towards Afghanistan to bomb an already impoverished population in the now historic war against terror. And we know this war started with these famous struggles between falcons and doves as different fractions of the political elite of the United States powerhouse were called. We know how this struggle ended. The specific Lager Falcon integrated in the Bird Wildlife Aircraft Strike Hazard, or BASH program, is a native auxiliary of the US Air Force who, by circling above, scares off other migratory birds as potential threats to aircrafts. The captain of the 376th Air Expeditionary Wing Safety Unit, who cares for this specific Lager Falcon, has named him Mustang, a feral horse of North America brought there originally by the Spanish conquistadors. We are already facing an entanglement of different actors, migratory routes, and constellations around this specific Lager Falcon. On the one hand, the Lager Falcon himself is described in Elisa's field reports of native informants as a local migrant. Between the neighboring countries of India and Pakistan, the Pashtun areas of Afghanistan, where I am from, parts of Iran, but also Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. We also learn that this bird is connected to nobility indirectly and to certain change of depths between different catchers of these birds and more prestigious birds. But there are also other migrants already here, the migratory birds who he scares off, and the missions of the militaristic migrants he helps to secure, and by the power of naming, also the migration of other colonial migrants and their introductions of other species on the American continents. The Lager Falcon is supposedly to be so effective because other birds like crows, rooks, kites, and swallows know these birds for millions of years. It's written on this military website, turning their response into a genetic condition. The living Lager Falcon, who is worth almost nothing at local markets, suddenly becomes a valuable natural safety resource for multi-billion artificial flying war machines, protecting them against air-to-air threats, much like the notorious fighter aircraft F-16, officially named Fighting Falcon, but called by its crews Viper, affirming the widespread animism connected to the naming of military vehicles like Leopard tanks, and the wish to harvest the historic, cultural, symbolic, and aesthetic characteristics of these animals. From the very first moment, the falcon of the common people, as the bird is sometimes called in the interviews of Elisa's field notes, from the very first moment, this animal is positioned in the force field of power and representation, identity and difference, inequality of wealth, and diversity of migration. At the same time, localist and globalist, seemingly timeless nature, at the same time connected to technology, border regimes, and new ecological concerns haunting old colonial frontiers. Through Elisa's work, we also see this brown falcon, as he's often called. But what do we see here? I want to quote the author Margaret Atwood, who once wrote, "For as long as we human beings can remember, we've been looking up. Over our heads went the birds, free as we were not, singing as we tried to. Some of us once believed that the birds could carry messages, and that if only we had the skills, we'd be able to decipher them. Wasn't the invention of writing inspired in China by the flight of cranes?" Another thinker, Alice Hochschild, writes about global care chains, where women from the south of the United States do the care labor for Californian women and leave their own families at home at the care of their oldest daughter. So the labor of care is delegated in certain chains. Could we similarly think of the human and non-human inhabitants of the places that Elisa's art piece depicts as links of a chain of life deemed worthless, but on the other hand, seemingly important enough to enable the machines of regional and global capitalism to function? Those migrants laboring to build the cities of post-industrial petrodollar power are often coming from exactly the same places as the lugger falcon himself, whose life is thrown away in search of the more prestigious and wealthy falcons sought after by the oil aristocracy and its layers of upper-class servants. Yanis Hadjinikolu argues in his research about the falconry as image vehicle and kinetic symbol in the context of the United Arab Emirates that falconry is a productive addition to the economic globalization of this region as a dual symbol of power and heritage. From ancient times on, falconry has explicitly cultivated a place of memory, yet it is not oriented only towards the past. On the 100 dirham banknote of the United Arab Emirates, for instance, tradition merges with technological innovation. Since the local segue falcon is represented looking in the direction of a modern building. And maybe a brown falcon died to harvest this falcon, and probably a person from the exactly same place maybe lost their life building the house that we see on this currency. The bird of prey is placed nearer to the viewer in comparison to the architectural landmark, which enhances its identification by the Emirati beholders as a national symbol. Modern buildings, such as the one on the 100 dirham note, was already emerging in the early 1980s. The visual medium points to the modernity of the country on the one hand, and the popularity of the traditional practice of falconry on the other. So this building is the World Trade Center in Dubai, very famously a symbol of the economic boom of the Emirates and an astonishing prosperity of the country. The falcon is, so to speak, not only a symbol of the past, but also of the present, although it currently bears different connotations that it had in the pre-oil era. And I wonder how certain ways of life are connected to certain ways of making life impossible in other places. Making a big jump, again, that this animal allows us to Germany, 800 years before, when the practice of falconry was introduced, not really introduced, but made very popular in Germany by Frederick II of Hohenstaufen around 1250. From there on, falconry images had a huge impact on the Western world and helped create a global imagery heavily influenced by Arabic sources. This pictoriality of falconry in Europe had a significant impact on the Arab world subsequently, functioning as a form of iconic feedback loop. Also, for example, Maximilian I, I think very famous Roman holy emperor, as a child, he already has a falcon on his arm. He's already here to rule. So we have falcons who are very much on the side of power and falcons who are, so to speak, on the other side. Historically, falcons have often been associated with the art of war, bearing connotations of bravery and valiance. Falconry very often represented in European images and texts. Falconry was represented as explicitly political activity, like so these falcons of the ruling class. And also in the United Arab Emirates, 5 years after the country declared itself independent from British rule, 5 years later, already there was the first falconry festival. And it made this young country internationally known through the organization of this local event, signifying an image to the outside and to the inside, and adding to the images of mega malls and oil drills this particular symbol, now being the official symbol of the Emirates. The Lager Falcon, on the other hand, keeps asking us which humans and non-humans will have to pay the price when national entities gain their independence and need materials and symbols to represent their identity. Who built the cities of tomorrow? Who will have a place in them or won't? And who will be killed to allow other forms of living to exist? The philosopher Jacques Derrida devoted his final lecture, The Beast and the Sovereign, to bestiality and wolfishness of sovereignty. The wolf, setting it against non-violence and dovishness. Since Thomas Hobbes, the image of the wolf as a state of nature of everyone, against which modern tamed civilization and statal disposition has prevailed as the personification of civil war in Western European modern times. Civil war is the maximum of dehumanization. For the fratricidal war, the war of brother against brother, the near and the intimately known must become something distant, abstract, monstrous. Unlike the English, the German language does not know the duplication of Taube into dove and pigeon. But the constellation of good doves and evil pigeon points towards politics that regulate the legitimacy of movement in public space. The one is legitimate, the white piece of dove. The other one is illegitimate, the pigeon who just takes over public spaces to, pardon my French, to fuck, shit, and eat around. One is representative, the other one is hunted. I wonder what position could a lager as a material living being and as a living metaphor play in the theater of philosophy, play in the animism that at least partly rules our conduct of life and the material life that we are sharing with this being. Timothy W. Luke argues in his article by Beyond Birds, Biopower and Bird Watching, that the oldest bird watching society of the United States, the National Audubon Society, produces a certain dispositif. At the root of these efforts is a discourse of pathos and a discipline of surveillance that turns birds into more performative sources of biopower. Beautiful, but pitiable. The beleaguered bird life of the nation is to be continuously watched, monitored, and counted so that human beings might feel sorrow for their destruction, as well as feel moved in their pathos to protect any survivors. Coming to an end, Elisa invites us to open up the possibility of other visions, of conviviality and potentialities of confraternity in partial connections. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion with my colleagues and the audience. So much for my little intro. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fahim. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. Wow. Already many questions popping up. I would like to move on to the next presentation, unless there are really, really burning questions in the room that need to come out right now. And then I would like to also give space to that urgency. But if there aren't, we can move on, maybe. Okay. Thank you very much, Fahim. Well, next in the lineup is Gabriel Alonso, who is an artist and researcher based in Madrid. And in his works, through different formats and different media, he investigates the contemporary relations between fiction and materiality, to blur the binomials between the human and the artificial, and between the natural and the cultural. So in 2020, he founded the Institutes for Post-Natural Studies, a center for artistic experimentation, from which to explore post-nature as a framework for contemporary creation. And his work has been exhibited in different galleries and international exhibitions, and he has recently published his last book, La Condición Postnatural. So, Gabriel, please take the stage.
Thank you so much, Bruno. Thank you so much, Elisa. Thank you so much, Fahim, for that beautiful text. Many things already resonating. I'm super happy to be here, and I'm also very happy and thankful for the time I could spend thinking with this Falcon around some issues and urgent things that we are researching from the Institute. I'm going to share screen. I have some images that I would like to share while I'm going to read a text that I've been writing the last week. And as I was saying, when I was speaking about the film, and not only about the film with Elisa, I took the invitation as an opportunity to think with the Falcon around some of the issues that we are exploring from the Institute, to think around, for example, the relation between nature and culture and how to blur and destabilize this binary system, but also between technology and the more than human cognition, between territories, landscapes, media ecologies. When Elisa was sharing some of the stories that she had encountered through her process, there was one that really struck me deeply, as she was sharing before, this network of falconers trying to reproduce the lagar falcon species in captivity by building a kind of genetic pool. So with the idea of then releasing it into the wild in the Indian subcontinent. So of course, a lot of questions arise from there, both ecological, but also ethical, technological, ontological. Animal breeding, animal captivity are without any doubt some important issues that we are addressing from this post-natural perspective. How by reproducing animals in captivity, humans play almost a curatorial role in the reproductive life of other species, creating a displaced falcon, bird far away from the territories it belongs to. For me, really raises many, many questions that I would like to share and maybe then conversate with you all. So if bird and territory, if bird and landscape are one thing, as I will try to develop in the following minutes, what will happen when its cultural behaviors are displaced into a foreign captive environment? How will this displacement affect both the bird and the landscape? Can we learn something from the falcon's biology that reshapes our understanding of intelligence and technology and move away from anthropocentric perspectives? So these and some other ideas will guide me today, exploring the relations, as I was saying, between landscape, territory, intelligence, and technology. And thinking with her about this idea of landscape, no, in this world saturated by image, the idea of the landscape, that image of a territory constructed from points of view, from cultural, economic, technological, or aesthetic inheritances, paradoxically derives from a lack of the visible. What builds the landscape is precisely what is not seen, what is hidden in its infinite layers, in the complexities of its mediation, in the contradictions of its extracted resources. So the landscape is not an image of reality, but a cultural construction generated by both humans and their technologies, this abstract, intangible, representational scenario. Painted, engraved, photographed, drawn, or scanned, the territory has always suffered abundant flattenings. And this excess of images, this kind of excess of world generated by the technologies of representation, also raises the need to include contemporary landscapes as media objects of the ecological crisis. So from a post-natural approach, landscape becomes a very kind of cinematic entanglement. That's why it was fascinating to speak through Elisa's work. So from the minerals and metals that compose the territory, and which actually enable developing our technologies and cultures, our videos, our films, to the speculative narratives of more than human worlds, the territory becomes then both a place of possibility, of geology and speculation, that also involves imaginaries that connect materiality and culture. I will propose, in parallel to Elisa's film, a kind of trans-scalar alchemy of the territory as an expansion of the birds that inhabit it, and a reflection of the complexities of technology when referring to landscape, but also to animal cognition. At the end of her compilation on photography, Susan Sontag concludes the essay, The World of the Image, with an important idea. If there can be a better way for the real world to include the one of images, it will require an ecology not only of real things, but of images as well. The urgency of the current crisis, therefore, lies in a deterioration that goes beyond the environmental. It is a phenomenon that also influences the field of cultural production, the mediatization of its processes, and the generation of all these associated images. This is why, understanding the complex entanglements of our post-natural ecology, this film is so important, as it also unveils or traces the different stories that blur the limits between the so-called natural and the so-called cultural. Territories are themselves great organisms. They're other than human bodies that change, digest, breathe, and think. Yes, maybe they think with a strange brain composed of minerals and salt, of vegetation, moss, lichens, and other species from the different kingdoms that populate its tissue. And they do so with the other animals who, like the falcon, help spread their seeds that populate its forest and compose its geological crust. Thinking is an act of collective synchronization. The world unfolds as living beings interact, interconnect. If we follow a general definition of intelligence as the capacity for abstraction, self-awareness, learning, and emotional knowledge, or as the ability to perceive or infer information and to retain it as applied knowledge, we could say that landscape not only thinks, but that it are fully intelligent. Perhaps the term intelligence, a quality unfairly appropriated by human beings, lies at the center of multiple of our ecological crises, delaying and precluding new ways of multi-species coexistence in our severely damaged planet. There are many questions that we must ask when facing with the belief that the only way of reasoning shapes the understanding of intelligence of every organism. So who is or what is intelligent? What are the material conditions necessary for intelligence to emerge? And who has the authority to contend that another being is or not intelligent? To many contemporary thinkers, intelligence is everywhere, from the flying spores that reproduce plants to the pores of the skin of the mammals, from the legs of insects to the sound of whales, to the wings and feathers of this falcon that we are speaking about today. Intelligent is, as I was saying before, life in action. Its infinite forms take the shape of relationships. And in this process, it makes a semiotic material environment from which we have to rethink post-anthropocentric relations with otherness, propose new forms of coexistence, and face the ecological problems by dismantling and abandoning the idea that intelligence is human only. And why the idea of intelligence should be dismantled more urgently today, and why it can be relevant to this film or to this work. The very term intelligence is every day more entangled in our contemporary culture. We link it to technology, to data management, to the production systems, which are uprooted, claiming instead other ways of inhabiting the world, that thinking within the world, making worlds, world in worlds themselves, and infusing them with meaning in a way that exceeds human standards and models. Decentering the anthropos is not enough to overcome the ideals of humanism in which this human-centered understanding of intelligence lies. So maybe in favor of a genuine multi-species alliance based on the productive and immanent force of all human and non-human life of Earth, what is crucial is a profound reconceptualization of subjectivity that goes away from the rational and conscious human autonomy, from this neoliberal, self-referential, self-indulgent individualism, but recognizes the historical, material, and situated embeddedness with other than human agents. We need to visualize the subject, the territory, the bird, as a transversal entity. And thinking with the falcon can be a great way to understand all these relationships, to unfold maybe a post-anthropocentric understanding of both intelligence, but also technology. Of course, I didn't know much about falcons before, but they are fascinating beings. They are long, slender, pointed. Their wings generate lift and minimize drag, allowing them to soar effortlessly through the sky. The shapes, coupled with their powerful muscles, enable them to achieve remarkable speeds and agility in flight. The falcon's keen eyesight is extremely precise, with eyes capable of spotting prey from great distances. The falcon scans the landscape. They become the landscape itself, integrating sight into the movement, becoming one with the geographies they navigate. In Living as a Bird, Vincent Desprez offers profound insights into the complex and often overlooked social dynamics of avian communities. Through a very meticulous observation and empathetic engagement with birds, she challenges anthropocentric notions of, again, intelligence, agency, and sociality, inviting us to reconsider our understanding of bird life. Desprez illuminates the way in which birds navigate and shape their environments through their actions and interactions. By examining how birds modify their habitats, communicate with one another, and respond to environmental changes, she reveals the intricate connections between avian lives and their ecosystems. Birds emerge not as passive inhabitants of their environments, but as active participants in shaping and co-creating the landscapes they inhabit. Their perception, memory, problem-solving abilities highlight the diverse ways in which they engage with, adapt to, and become part of their surroundings. But Vincent Desprez's bird exploration also gives insight into how they can be understood as technologies, offering a thought-provoking perspective on the complex relationship, again, between humans and other than human animals. As in Elisa's film, this relation challenges conventional understandings of technology, again, as exclusively human-made artifacts, proposing a broader conceptualization that includes how animals, including, of course, birds, actively shape and mediate environments. In the book, she even calls birds ecological engineers, capable of modifying inhabitants and influencing ecosystem dynamics through their behaviors. From nest building and seed dispersal to predation and territorial marking, birds engage in a range of activities that contribute to the functioning and resilience of their territories. In this sense, birds can be seen as biological technologies that play critical roles in shaping and sustaining the environments in which they live. Humans, of course, have historically co-opted and utilized birds as technologies for various purposes, ranging from hunting and pest control to communication and transportation. And as Elisa shared, the use of falcons in falconry demonstrates how humans have long recognized and capitalized maybe on the innate abilities of birds for hunting, sports, and recognizing landscape. It is no coincidence that a falcon stands on the cover of her book, looking from the top of a tree branch as if it were its legs, with a blurred background of the mountain it inhabits. However, understanding the falcon as a technology also implies ecological responsibilities. Going back to the first question and understanding also that this species is tried to be raised in captivity, the intersection between technology and ecology within human-produced wildlife requires new understandings that redefine the way we describe the paradoxical cultural processes behind developing wilderness within captivity. Of course, here's wilderness could be a word that we could speak for a long time. And this is again why this film might be so important. Slowly disappearing in the wild, the falcon has become a near-threatened species, often overlooked, and as Lisa coins, and seldom appearing in historical narratives and depiction, largely missing from the collective memory and imagination. The lagar is becoming increasingly more popular in the moment of its looming extinction, in connection with an international community of falconers and their endeavors in raising awareness and counteracting the threat of the falcon vanishing from the wild. I'll then stick to this beautiful idea by Desprez. If the falcon is a technology, it is a biological one, a territorial one. There is no falcon without its territory. There is no such body, intelligence, or ability that can be dispossessed from its context. Trying to replicate the falcon through its DNA is only understanding partially what this amazing creature is made of. In the moment of excessive technological development, there is a huge risk in trying to replicate specific parameters or abilities from other than humans without understanding their embeddedness in their surroundings. Technologies must be then approached not only scientifically but also culturally, understanding the many non-humans that exist on the planet biologically and also philosophically and intimately. When speaking about this with Elisa, she addressed also that something that could be read as a kind of act of resistance emerging from the bird's stomach. Overall, the stomach of a bird serves as a vital link between its physiological needs, behavioral adaptations, and the ecological processes shaping the territories it inhabits. The falcon's stomach structures and digestive systems process a wide range of food items, including seeds, insects, fish, small mammals that are again part of these territories. Birds contribute to ecosystem dynamics and nutrient cycling, influencing plant distribution, prey populations, and trophic interactions. The technology that fascinates us is also biological, and their navigation and outstanding system is also linked to the microbiota, to the bacteria that live within it. Their intelligence is therefore not only in their heads, in their brains, or in their feathers, but dispersed across their bodies. Desprez's exploration of animal dreams also offers a fascinating perspective of the inner lives and their subjective experiences. One key aspect of her ideas about animal dreams is her emphasis on interspecies empathy and imagination. By considering the possibility of animals dreaming, Desprez invites us to emphasize with their experiences and engage in imaginative exercises that challenge our assumptions about the nature of consciousness and again, intelligence. While I'm reading this and I was looking at Elisa's film, I started thinking, and I keep thinking, what would this captive animal dream of? If understood as a technology and meshed within the productive and extractive relation with its condition and taken out of its territory, what will these cyborgian creatures feel and dream? Maybe the dreams of lagar falcons recreate previous states of the cliffs or the rocks that house their ancestors. Maybe the captive falcon's dreams will be populated with data flows, colored squares or species recognition, machine learning algorithm, or plastic surfaces. To think of the artificially bred lagar falcon's dreams is to think of that dream emerging from the landscape and within its stomach. It is to think far from human exceptionalism in favor of a multi-species ecology. So thank you, Elisa, for making me think with the falcon. During these days, it showed me something very important, that ecology is about recognizing differences, situating bodies, while embracing strangeness and engaging with significant otherness. That technology is also about caring about other human dreams, other than human dreams, that it might be our shared ecological responsibility. So I will end here, and I'm sure we will have time afterwards for the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Beautiful presentation. Good time management, so you're all doing very well, thank you. Okay, so if there are no burning questions, we can move on for the last presentation. And then afterwards we go into a conversation. So our last speaker, joining us online from London, and is Jol Thoms, an artist, sound designer, and researcher, where he's studio lecturer at the MA Art and Ecology at Goldsmiths. His practice addresses our relationship with nature, technology, and the cosmos, reconfiguring boundaries between non-human, cosmological, and the scientific, using different strategies from quantum field theory, experimental audiovisual arts, environmental humanities, and feminist anti-colonial science studies. Thoms also initiated the Ocean Sound Art Ritual, Radio Amnion, in 2020, relaying artistic compositions 2.5 kilometers deep in the Pacific Ocean during each full moon. I hope this didn't give any spoilers on your presentation, Jol, sorry about that. He has also participated in several exhibitions internationally that you can find more information online, I'm sure. So without further ado, Jol, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks so much. It's lovely to be here in this kind of aerial choreography of winged concepts and entities. Elisa and I studied together at Städelschule, so it's especially nice coming together here with you all. I'm also going to share my screen and start this presentation, which I would change the title to The Dove, the Dream, and Sonic Identity after these talks, which has a lot of resonance, as I think you'll see as we move forward. So just to say what is going to happen, I'm going to quickly talk about a couple pieces of scholarship that I think are essential to discussion around non-human others. Then I'll talk about a couple of different projects that I think also speak to this, including one of my own, but not only. And of course, this all is in the context of Elisa's work in Karachi with the Falcon. And just to say, there may not be super explicit links, but the ethical aesthetic choices that Elisa makes to refrain from having human language in her films will be the key to kind of pulling the knot together. So let's begin first with a little reading ceremony. There exist other kinds of thinking selves beyond the human, which is from Eduardo Cohn's 2017 text, How Forests Think. And this work of anthropology is based on a decade of ethnographic research with the Avila Runa people of the Upper Amazon in Ecuador. And Eduardo Cohn has been very influential in my thought concerning modes and techniques to dissolve the hegemony of the individual and the role of the individual in the Western psyche. So if the ontological turn of the previous decades is in favor of a radical methodological openness to difference among human cultural traditions, How Forests Think extends itself through this openness towards a term I find quite endearing, the living thought of the world. One of the many findings this research produced is found perhaps best in this quote. We form a part of a thinking nature, even as our culture tends to separate us from it. Learning to recognize and work with the properties a thinking forest exhibits is key to understanding our continuity with those others with whom we share our earthly home, and key to finding ethical guidance from this world called forest. There's a vast form of thinking that holds and sustains our human forms of thought. If we can grasp the continuity between our thinking and this different kind of thought, and if we can find ways to learn to think with it, we might be able to put a check on the human propensity to sever ourselves from the world. Now, I'll pause here for a moment to note the phrase, the human propensity to sever ourselves from the world, because this is something that was, of course, accelerated during the Enlightenment and so-called period of modernity. And the theoretical and philosophical dissection of the white Western human from the realms of nature, as its colonialist project was industrializing, was a project that came along with secularization and the desire for mining and usury. And there's a really fantastic book called States of the Earth, An Ecological and Racial History of Secularization by Mohamed Aber Meziane, which I don't have enough time in this talk to speak to. But I'll just say this in the reading ceremony, this next quote. An ecological critique of what the West has called its secularization cannot be summed up simply by calculating the excess quantities of CO2 disseminated into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels. It must perform a critique of the reason that governs industry, of which an obsession with calculation is itself a figure. Later, he goes on to refer to secularization as a climate phenomenon. But back to how forests think. The Runa used many techniques for thinking with forests. Central among these is dream interpretation. Dreams think the way forests do, via chains of imagistic associations, and they reveal some of the properties of this form of thought and the ways it produces those things, like abstractions and generalities, we might otherwise associate exclusively with human minds. So here we can understand that the way forests think through images, according to those people who live and as the forest, is one way to communicate things that think and communicate in images, possibly like falcons. Another essential work with indigenous folks, the Bosavi people in Papua New Guinea, is by Stephen Feld. I interviewed Stephen Feld last year at Nottingham Contemporary in the UK, and he is an anthropologist of music who coined the term acoustemology while defining the field of anthropology of music. And acoustemology speaks directly to one's sonic way of knowing and being in the world. His sensory ethnography is set in the rainforest of Papua New Guinea among the Kaluli people of Bosavi. Sound and sentiment introduced the anthropology of sound or the cultural study of sound. Something quite amazing about the Voices of the Rainforest project is that all the proceeds from this album, which really exploded in the West because the Grateful Dead got hooked on it and played it at all of their concerts, which allowed Westerners to really listen into the Bosavi. All of the income from this project, done dialogically with the Bosavi people and Stephen Feld, went back to the Bosavi people, allowing them to make their own cultural centers and protect themselves from mining and logging. So it's a kind of sonic activism. is perhaps most relevant about this work of Sound and Sentiment is that it begins with the traditional story of the boy who became a moony bird. When his sister will not share crayfish with him, he Feld is shocked by the story of a boy who flies away, making the descending tones of the bird call, and also struck by the centrality of this story and ritual within the Bosavi region that says so much about birds, social values, and sound making. Kaluli believed that birds are spirits of their ancestor kin. So knowing the calls and sounds is of utmost importance. And critically, there is meaning inside or underneath the sound. Invoking a bird's name while constructing a drum ensures that the drum will have a continued resonance. At the beginning of the book, one of the Kaluli, or at the beginning of Feld's research, which was decades, one of the Kaluli says to him, "To you, there are only bird calls, but to me, they are voices in the rainforest," highlighting the plural modes of interpreting nature between cultures and the plural modes of harmonizing with it. So I'm kind of shifting gears now to look at these fairly well-known science fiction stories that articulate planetary bodies and solar systems as sentient, communicative, and intelligent. In this sense, they echo indigenous epistemology and traditional knowledge of land and place. Traditional ancestral knowledges have always been what the Martinican poet Edouard Glissant's epitaph reads, "Nothing is real, everything is alive." That's part of a track by Blank Steel called Orbit, part of a project called Radio Amnion. And Radio Amnion is a cosmopolitical ocean ritual located in the Cascadia Basin node of Ocean Networks Canada and their Neptune Observatory. The Cascadia Basin is 300 kilometers west from the shore of Vancouver Island, and the site of that particular sound sculpture is minus 2.3 kilometers. The Technical University of Munich's physics department are collaborating with the Ocean Networks Canada to develop this neutrino telescope in the abyss of the Pacific Ocean. The neutrino telescope and this matricial array of optical equipment housed within submersible glass spheres over a range of multiple cubic kilometers. And after a process of Fourier transforming the sound to light wave information, we use the 16-stage LED calibration system of the telescope to pulse the messages to the ocean as well in light. So we proceed with a multisensory communication system, a harmonizing with cosmos and nature at an abyssal site where new knowledge is being created by sciences of marine biology, oceanography, and particle physics. The neutrino itself is a sort of anarchic instigator, troubling the standard model of particle physics, the physical model code that describes all matter, energy, and force. Well, it used to until the neutrino came along. So what we're watching is a reenactment or reproduction of a superluminal event, a particle cascade initiated by a neutrino decay, all traveling faster than the speed of light in the ocean water. So each full moon since June 2021, I've commissioned, with the support of the Canada Council for the Arts, new compositions from artists and experimental musicians. And I ask each of them to address their sounding and their voicing to the ocean as a sentient, living, communicative, and intelligent entity. And this way, testing the walls of reality itself. Keenly aware of my status as a white, cis, and quite privileged human that gets to access scientific laboratories in very remote regions across the planet, I rather took this opportunity to invite other voices and positions into these frameworks that may otherwise not get such an opportunity or such access. And I'll just highlight the quote on the bottom that says, "Art does not begin and end with humans," which is from Richard Powers, who authored the incredible book, The Overstory. And I recently presented this at the opening ceremonies of the Venice Biennale. But an essential philosophy behind the project has to do with the nature of sound, asking what sound is and can do. What is the last sound dream that you can remember? Can sound carry intention of care within the ineffable domain where the magic of nature more profoundly resides? Do our soundings and voicings enter into the deep time hydrological cycles of Earth? Can we gain intimacy without proximity to the vast being of ocean through this deep listening adventure? So sound in the West was radically transmogrified by the journey from the East of Indian classical music, which went on to inspire Cage, Lamont Young, the Dream Syndicate, including John Cale of the Velvet Underground, Catherine Christer Hennix, Terry Riley, and so many others. One of their gurus was a man by the name of Pandit Pran Nath, who likely also introduced the idea of instruction pieces into modern art when he said to his initiates, "God is sound, explained by singing." In lieu of time, I might continue here anyways. Part of our ritual includes live events during full moons where we practice sonic meditation of Pauline Oliveros. These sonic meditations reattune us to our environment, and our listening changes what we listen to, which is why Oliveros has referred to her practice as quantum listening. So in the same way that the observer changes what is observed in quantum mechanics, listening changes what we listen to during sonic meditations. So we return to Vincent Desprez, which is another quotation that has always sat with me for so long. To think of a thought that dwells at the edge of thought, another mode altogether, beyond human thought, to be open to this possibility. And now I just wanted to talk about a couple of film practices to mention here who also work in this non-narrative style, using sound rather than language to kind of enter into the poetics and enter into the dream of experience of being more than one past the individual. So Gerard Horten's recent work, including the latest Bliss Point, is a series of perspectives on the logistics of agriculture and cultural production of food imaginaries through high-end image production. From his work Wolf Dog or Reserve to agrologistics, all of his films include other than humans, and most are non-narrative, allowing the co-production of sound and image to inform our understandings of complex processes without a didactic voiceover or spoken narrative to lead our thinking. Sonia Levy's research-led practice considers shifting modes of engagement with other than human worlds in light of prevailing earthly precarity. Her work operates at the intersection of art and science, a co-becoming of practices tending to the reweaving of multi-species worlds. In her most recent work with the Lagoon of Venice, called We Marry You, O Sea, as a Sign of True and Perpetual Dominion, she worked with a choral group to make the sounds or the foley of the water. She was producing submerged perspectives from within, which to me breaks down the hegemony of the human and its languaging towards where her fieldwork becomes an activist project for the lagoon, its beings and their multiple forms of agency. So through these practices, without falling back on tropes of psychedelia, we enter into something akin to a dream state, a meditative state where the boundaries between ourselves, technologies, and more than human others speak and naturally attest to their rights to life, to rights to live without becoming further toxified by anthropogenic wastes, toxins we know are quite literally killing the one living planet that we also emerged from and are essentially of and as.
All of the time?
Yeah, is the timing good?
We've run out of time, but you can conclude your thought.
Okay, well, this is Mar Menor. It's the first ecosystem in Europe to get legal personhood as of last summer. And I think that is also another way to think of rights of nature and beings. And thank you for your time. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear clapping? Okay, good. That's, it's important, it's satisfying. Thank you so much for the presentations. I mean, there's a wealth of angles and questions and a shortage of time. But for those who just joined us throughout the presentations, now is the time where we are very open to your questions. And the purpose of this is to, depart from Elisa's work and from the exhibition upstairs to think through these questions and think through, the work in process as something to pose questions from. And very welcome also the speakers to ask questions to one another or to us and Elisa. So just as a disclaimer that your participation is very welcome. So feel free to interrupt me at any point.
I would just like to interject. If you have a question from the audience, please wait for this microphone. That way the other speakers and everyone can be heard.
Exactly. I would like to maybe continue thinking what Jol just presented and thinking of sonic and listening practices in relation to linguistic semantic communication. And earlier, when I was visiting the exhibition with Elisa, we were talking about how, the work's still being in process and this choice of omitting this communication with words and with descriptions and with narration was a very intentional operation of the work, but one that comes with discomfort because you still have you still want to kind of honor the context and the process and the references and knowledge that you accumulate throughout this process of making the work. And then the sonic and this collaboration with the vocalist and with the composer kind of open up possibilities that are still being explored, and I think you're still digesting them throughout the process. And this idea of the sonic identity of the bird is also something that interests me quite a lot. So I was curious in hearing more about and maybe giving you the opportunity, Elisa, to talk a bit more about this decision of omitting this narration and exploring the sonic aspect. And following up Jol's presentation and the possibilities of almost like creating this precognitive attunement to the environment around us and maybe generating more different modes of empathy and slowing down and attuning to other kind of modes of communication, if you see that as a potential development of the work.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me, actually? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for the presentations. They were wonderful, and thanks for this question as well. So basically, as an artist, I'm very attached to language. I use writing and storytelling a lot. But through this work, I found it very difficult because when you write, usually you write from a certain position, and you also want to give a direction. And I didn't want to make a video which was, I don't know, like educational, or that that spoke through the perspective of a human, and I didn't want to also speak from the perspective of a bird, because it doesn't make sense to me to put myself in the position of the bird. So I don't use language yet, although I would like to use it. Maybe the idea of actually using sound or playing with music, it's a good approach. And that's what I started doing by inviting the composer and the vocalist. Also, the vocalist, she doesn't actually sing a narrative. I think she's using a traditional way of singing from Indian culture. And from what I heard from people in Pakistan, they said that the type of singing reminds them of a sort of mourning sound or mourning singing, which is somehow also related with this aspect of the bird disappearing. So this way of using sound is more, how can I say? It defines a sort of atmosphere rather than directing the spectator through a narrative toward a certain understanding.
This connection to like local knowledge or local forms of expression also relates to what Jol was, some of the references that Jol brought up. And I was wondering to a certain extent, to what extent these indigenous local knowledges and these epistemologies that have been, ultimately neglected by not only Western modes of, Western cosmovisions, but also through specific devices in which artists used to, or formats that artists used to express their works. I was wondering if this working with the knowledge that is there through these, sonic practices or these vocalizations or the reference to specific, songs or traditional narratives through singing. How does that inform also the work or the way that you collaborate with this vocalist?
Yeah, the vocalist, she is called Zirak. She is from Karachi, and I think it's mainly embedded into the way she is using her voice. She has a huge research on sound and on sonic memory through traditional singing. So personally, like from my point of view, I'm Western and I know very little of the local culture. So in a way, the whole process for me was a way to encounter a new bird, but also a way of getting into, like meeting this very different culture for me, and I found very generous people who kind of embrace the discourse and enter their own voice. But for example, Zirak, the vocalist, or the falconers who own these traditions in generations, like how to actually relate with the birds and so on. I could be part of it as a sort of witness or spectators, or maybe catalyst to merge them together into the work.
And I think maybe something that is interesting in this sonic practice for me, and I'm extending the question also to you, or the reflection to you, Jol, is that it's not only an operation to that is expressed as the final result when we see the work, but it's also a tool of generating some sort of communication with or dialogue with more than human entities. And I think the project that you just presented, Jol, is very poetic in the way it does it with the ocean floor in a way. So I was wondering how you see the sonic as a procedural tool in the process of trying to kind of create an interlocution with these more than human entities, these falcons specifically. And how is the experience also for you, Jol?
Oh, thanks. I was trying to raise my hand and I started clapping. That is the question. Like, what is inside sound? What is underneath sound? As the Kaluli ask. I believe that we still don't really understand what sound is capable of. We know that it can create an atmosphere and has kind of tremendous affect, and so it is something that can produce perhaps empathy or camaraderie between different kin. I was recently talking with some friends of mine, and they were doing one of these sonic meditations of Oliveros, where you kind of are clicking stones together in a group, but in response to what you're hearing. And it was kind of going on and on and on. And you just kind of stop when it feels everyone just kind of naturally stops when the time comes. And as soon as they stopped, they were near a forest, like this huge murmuration came out and started singing and flying around. And they really believed they were tapping into this kind of sonic memory or sonicness of being, or the vibratory pattern of life. But I'm also thinking in these field notes, Elisa, where there's this man who keeps freeing all these birds, and they keep returning, and he keeps freeing the birds, and they keep returning, and he's freeing the birds again. And he ends up freeing this like one more expensive bird or something. And then someone from like a decade ago suddenly remembered that they owe him loads of money, and they like give him all this money. And he refers to the prayer of the bird. And he says, every time you set a bird free, it says a prayer for you. And I think there's something there possibly that could be interesting to attempt to understand.
Yes, so basically there is this belief in the Indian, let's say in the Indian subcontinent in general, but it's a belief shared by different spiritual practices, is that when you release a bird, this bird can carry a prayer to God faster than man, because animals don't use language and they are so, let's say, pure. They are not touched by evil. So when you do good to a bird by releasing it, the bird will carry your prayer to God, basically.
There's a question, but can I, before I go to you, can I just, because just following up this idea of language, and I know that Fahim has been looking into this understanding of animals as political companions or political agents, right? And in your book, Being in Swine, you ask, is the full possession of human mental and physical faculties an absolute prerequisite for being political? And I guess language is what sanctions your, entrance in the political arena of discussion, right? Or one of the things. And I was just curious to hear from Fahim his perspective and like to what extent these artistic modes of translation, for lack of a better word, could help expand what we understand as a political field or political arena, and who has a voice within it.
Thank you. Adding something to this excellent contributions, I totally understand the urge not to over-didact. such a visual constellation that is at the same time a political constellation, because I think we all are bored of this David Attenborough voice that gets on in the head. Look, the baby gazelle will starve to death if we don't do something. And why didn't he do something? Why we do we? At the same time, in my personal life, of course, in the very specific artistic constellation where complexities are allowed, where subtle, contradictory elements are welcomed, of course, sound plays a totally different role. But in my personal life, like the worst intrusion is sound, because I cannot, it's very hard to seal your ears off. And the worst thing is for my life in movies, because then it's already, okay, the sound comes, it's clear what happens next, and everything is gone. At the same time, I have the feeling that, for example, just as also a personal biographism, when I saw The Pearl Button by Patricio Guzman, where he narrates also ecological concern and the destruction of the left opposition in Chile, but at the same time also the destruction of the life worlds of indigenous groups. He worked both with sound in a very interesting way, but also with narration, because he embraced the possibility to also more freely work with words. So as far as I'm concerned, both places like narration and sound allow things and make things harder. And being a young father myself, my baby is just 1 year old. Like, I speak with my baby all the time, but it's obvious that the little one does not really understand the words in itself. But like, speaking is also affect. Speaking is also rhythm. So I would say that there are aspects of sound also in speaking and other way around. But maybe this is not subtle enough or not precise enough. Coming to your question or your invitation to think about. Yeah, this is an excellent point that I'm not really sure of what to make it. On the one side, like the gist of an argument of mine is, as a philosopher, I don't think you have to speak the language of the oppressor to be allowed to have a voice. So we all know that, then there are these strange mirror tests. Can a cat see itself in the mirror? And of course, no cat can see it in the mirror, but the moment we put a little bit of smelly stuff, smelling like the cat immediately understood itself that it is here. So it's a mirror stage. So with that we play around. So, but then the question is, of course, from a more general point, because this issue raises also with very elderly people, with people with neurodiversity, with all kind of issues, like what should we do of their language? Does it mean this entity does not really exist because it cannot produce a coherent sentence with syntax? And okay, intention is clear, then responsibility is clear, but what is it? Just sound, or is it nothing? So this question still arises. My main argument is, so you don't have to, so to speak the language, but it doesn't mean that you cannot make yourself known. That is also not straight communication without a loss, quality loss, so to speak, with these IT models where they're promising us nothing is lost, so to speak. I think in communication, always something is lost and something is gained. And of course, I like coming to the notion of translation. I would argue from a Walter Benjaminian point to so to speak, if you try to make sense of a Turkish poem, for example, from Turkey into German, translating it, that the point should be that at the end, the German language has become a little bit Turkish. So you bring something over. It's not yet really knowing maybe what it is and what touches. So it is that you bring difference. Not the other way around, not the silence. And the last little thing, I put it in my talk, but very hidden. I use the word native informant. And this is once or twice. The question is also the idea of native informant. The native informant speaks to us. I will make this point sure. It is a notion I came up recently in the book of Gayatri Spivak, The Critique of Post-Colonial Reason, where the whole book is about actually the position of the native informant. In former times, where the people would tell the colonialists, go there, it's dangerous, or maybe do this, entering a territory that you're not familiar with. But nowadays, we could take the native informant as, the sentinel species. The species that when we find it in a river, tells us the river is healthy. So we all still have this informant, but the informant is always part of an inside and an outside, because he has to be able to speak to us somehow, because we can detect it. There are 1 million type of these little fishes there, or some speak to us, so it's somehow in our proximity. At the same time, it's part of this other thing. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to communicate. Honestly, because the question of the colleague raised out, what was the last sonic dream? Actually, a very great question. I don't remember any dream of mine being sonic, but of course it must have been. And also, of course, the role that birds played in surrealism and everything after psychoanalysis, also as a communicator between worlds, or also just coming and being away, like an idea, like an image, suddenly, like with supernatural powers. So that was not a concise answer, I have to tell, but there were some reactions to what I heard and what I saw.
Great, thank you very much, Fahim. So we have a question from the public. Can we get the microphone? Yeah, thank you.
So hello, everybody. I am really, really grateful for all your different perspectives. Have been I needed time to process. They have been really, really nice. And I felt a lot of discomfort because there is all your talks are about contradictions. And I can see it, you yourself identify as an external person going there. And I am a migrant myself, and I love this idea of context and agency within the context. And how, for example, I remember vividly during COVID, that I said I will never go to a zoo again because it felt so oppressive, not being able to interact with my context, not being able, to co-create with this context. And there is a lot of talk about agency and transformation here. And for me, I am really curious about how did you experience this discomfort? How did you experience these contradictions? And how that is reflected in your work, because of course it's clear there, and it is a point of agency of the bird, and of course there is the law of nature, life and death, loss and win, but of course power says who is winning and who is losing, and who actually has agency, and for me it's really fascinating to see this, this bigger context of there is not human or culture institutions, but if we look at the whole ecosystem as we as part of the ecosystem, what does it say about what we respect the wishes of life itself, So I wanted to hear more about if you experienced that, how did you, process that, and how did you express that?
Thank you very much for your question. It was actually one of the main how can I say, one of the main questions that I had as soon as I arrived in Pakistan, or I actually had this motivation to travel there and meet the birds and see the birds, so not only to know them through some narrative or second-hand story, let's say. And when I was there, I had a very short time. I was there only for 1 month at the beginning, then I came back for another month. So I immediately wanted to place myself into a sort of active situation, even if it was a small one. So I had to come up with sort of an idea, and I used this process of wanting to make a film as a way to engage people, and I decided to make a simple active action, which was that of collaborating with them to rescue four birds from the market and release them. So it's a very simple, small action, which, like seen from a large scale of disappearing species, it sounds like a very small action, which it is. But I was told a few weeks ago from a scientist, I was told, yes, but from the perspective of each single bird is a huge action, because of course you kind of save one life and in the process. So there is always this kind of big distinction of scale from the very local, very small, to the very global and abstract. And I'm always kind of jumping in the process from one to the other. I guess the question of agency is actually how you place yourself into this divide.
And maybe if I can invite Gabriel to speak a bit about that, because I feel this holistic approach, it's also at the core of the Institute for Postnatural Studies, and also this question of situatedness and the indivisibility of territory, species, and our actions within it was something that you're referring to it, and I feel that it's something that you're pointing at. So I just wanted to hear from you, Gabriel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for all the beautiful reflections. While researching about this post-natural as a kind of invitation to rethink our relation, of course, Western construction of a modern understanding, an idealized and romanticized way of understanding nature, we found ourselves really zooming in very specific situations to try to grasp and to think what post-nature could be. And it was really about being precise and contextual, and while doing so, understanding the specificities of the connections that unfold. So if you are referring to something that is connected to some other things, then you can start thinking of these lines, these invisible lines that are creating these connections, these economic, aesthetic, political connections. If you try to think about everything, if you try to think about the whole big picture, then there is a lot of opacity that has been mediated, that has been created in order to distance ourselves from that problematic itself. Then there are a lot of interests, hidden interests, of course, political interests, and so on. So we understood that by looking at very specific things, and by tracing these very specific relations, we could enter and unfold ways of understanding post-nature from many different perspectives. And that also talks about the idea of the multi-layered understanding of worlds, of natures, of times. So this kind of plurality of the different ways of approaching ecologies, and it was very important. Like this, when I started thinking with the Falcon, when I started thinking with a plan, when I started thinking with a specific rock, it's suddenly that all these very close relations are speaking about a world that has been shaped through these very small scale kind of situations. And for me, that's a beautiful way of thinking. It helps me think. It helps me think from these. And I just want to resonate with this idea of an era of sound, because that's something that we are really researching and investigating from the Institute. I would rather say maybe an era of listening as an act of radical ecological care, rather than sound or producing sound or storing sound, really listening as an act of awareness. Listening unfolds a different way of being in the world. Listening is an act of giving space, of giving other, might be another human, but also another species, the space to just be. And I think this new era of listening can be very important for a different ecological perspective. And I couldn't stop thinking of David Attenborough's when Fahim was referring to him. There is this amazing video that David Attenborough is referring to the lyrebird, that is reproducing the technologies or the machine saws or the cars that are parked in the forest that it inhabits. So suddenly, it also makes me think of how these birds, seen as technologies, are also recording and storing our own sounds, and they're reproducing them. So suddenly it's a fascinating relation of misunderstandings. And I think this idea of a non-verbal, as you were referring to, Fahim, relational scenario in which it's not by producing significance, or it's not by producing meaning, but actually is by friction, like creating these frictions, creating these empathies and affecting one another. No? So this beautiful idea of German becoming Turkish by trying to translate it, I think we become birds by listening to their songs, and they become humans by listening to our chainsaws. So in that interaction, there is a fruitful way of understanding ecology from this also very specific perspective.
I love that idea, and also I think the second realm of questions that interest me very much following the presentations were, I mean, starting with Fahim, thinking about the falcon as a symbol of power and heritage and the modernity of a country, but also at the same time that specific brown falcon that is the migrant, that is the other, that is who the life can be at the expense of something, bigger that has to do with border regimes, with warfare, and the weaponization of a species almost, right? And Gabriel, you were also talking about these biological technologies and this notion of ecological engineers by Vicente Desprez. And earlier on, I was talking to Elisa, and it would be maybe interesting to elaborate a bit more on your research that you found some not commonalities, but like parallels between the way that these falcons are perceived and also the association to lower classes. Also that the fact that they're used as decoy for bigger predators is like their lives are expendable. So I was wondering if you, Elisa, but maybe whoever else, Fahim and Gabriel, whoever is open to anyone, if we could think a little bit in a very quick way, because we're running out of time, about this correlation. Is what you were saying, Gabriel, about this cross-pollination between animals or more than human entities and humans, and what that does to our notions of humanity, but also how this relation becomes a mirror for both, self and social dynamics. So at smaller scale, but also even geopolitical scales, I would argue. But maybe start with Elisa talking a bit about that correlation.
Yes, I really like how Fahim saw this falcon as a sort of living metaphor, and elaborated so well about it. I can give some information, which is something that I got to know about how this lager falcon is perceived by the falconer community, in the sense that there is a sort of economical hierarchical order of these falcons, in a sense that there are the falcons with the lowest economical value, and this lager falcon is one of them because it has a small body and cannot hunt big prey. This is basically one of the main reasons. So there are falcons at the lowest scale of value, in the sense that you could buy one of these falcons in the market for $30, for example. And in the same hierarchical scale, at the top, there are falcons like the peregrines and the sakers, which you could buy them for $5,000 up to even $70,000, one bird. So the scale, like the difference is huge. And how it reflects in a sort of class system is that, for example, a falconer was telling me that in Pakistan, people can afford, or falconers can afford, to buy a lager falcon because they are able to spend $30, but often they are no longer able to acquire sakers or peregrine because they became too expensive. And they became too expensive because they are very much sought after by the Arabs, which are able to spend this kind of money for a bird. So this is how it is today, but even historically, this lager falcon has always been associated with the lowest class, I have found this page in a manuscript of more than 200 years ago, in which there is written that this lager falcon was used by common peoples, like the commoners. And it was so super abundant in India. Like probably you could find it very easily in the outskirts of the city or hunting pigeons, even in urban areas. But now it is completely gone and it became rare.
Fahim?
Yes.
Yeah.
And, like animals very often condense in a certain, make visible or perceivable broader constellations. Just to bring one very common or famous example. During this war against terror, the last 20 years, at the beginning, when a lot of the NGOs went to Afghanistan, there was a situation with the zoo, the Afghan zoo, the Kabul zoo, very much financed by Germany. And then there was a very old lion there with almost no teeth. And like the whole animal protection scene worldwide, and oh my God, this poor, and everybody, there were huge campaigns and millions of dollars, and a lot of meat was sent there, real meat, and people wanted to give with a picture, I give this starving Afghan lion meat from Europe. Yeah? And he got so much meat that he immediately died. It was too much. Everything of this was too much. And I think this one story tells a lot of stuff that is going on in Afghanistan, but also what's going on in zoos. The colleague from the audience mentioned that after the start of COVID, she didn't want to go to the zoo. Actually, no people were going to the zoo at that moment. And what zoos started to do, to run around with animals from the zoo in the zoo, visiting other animals, like penguins walking around. And so, of course, it was a visual, so to speak, visual spectacle. Or other people started to produce little museums for their pets at home. If we all remember, there was this one Guggenheim Museum for guinea pigs at home. So like this, little artworks for little animals. So like these animal stories, these anecdotes, so to speak, I think it's interesting that they get they also have the form of an anecdote. Very often people tell me these little stories that are almost like fragments of reality where you not easily can find a morality to it, but it seems meaningful. So stories with animals very often give us the impression they mean something, but we not yet have a clear picture what it may be. Coming to the question of the connectedness of certain animals with certain classes, for me, it is quite clear that this dimension of reality that we call nature, and this in a certain way saved from the contradictions of our world, isn't like that at all. The class positions also stretch to animals in a lot of ways. There are animals who inherit millions of dollars. There are animals who have possibilities to get into clinics. They have a life that a lot of people would love to share on one side. And on the other side, there are, exactly as I mentioned, animals that can be regarded to be even part of the working class. So Friedrich Engels, he almost wrote it because like the free-ranging pigs of the working class, they were everywhere like pigs just running around, that in every second page writing about English working class, it was also something about pigs. So pigs actually were regarded to be part of the working class in certain contexts, also because they were seemingly uncivilized, like the proletariat, sexualized, and also gendered, so to speak. And also the last point, aspects of migration. Like the point is, animals not only haunt our dreams, they also haunt our nightmares. And there are certain animals who live through different conjuncture, where they're suddenly very much regarded and then they mean nothing. And we are confronted all over with these regimes. For example, right now, maybe you've heard it, there's this idea of the African swine fever, so to speak. And for a couple of years, every 1 or 2 years, oh my God, African swine fever. And then our hogs that individually count for nothing. Like individual industrial hog, nothing. But the species of the industrial hog, when it gets some kind of pathogen from outside, and then 1 million hogs have to be killed, this is very, very expensive. And what is the reaction? For example, the former German chancellor, Angela Merkel, there were very famous pictures that she making fences to Denmark, not to allowing the pigs to migrate like wild pigs. But of course, pigs can swim. So this whole fence is only for the human audience, only for the Germans. So oh, thank God, the chancellor is doing something against these dangerous, maybe even half African pigs. What they, of course, aren't. But last point, like very famously by Giorgio Agamben, who argued that we have to rethink the idea of the political realm of the nation from the position of the refugee, of the immigrant, who's stripped of all rights. Because as we see in the Mediterranean every year, the human right seems to mean not much if you're not at the same time a member of a nation. You are also a citizen, not only a human, but also a citizen of a nation, and the nation will try to do something for your rights. So seemingly, it is you need more than just human rights, more than just animal rights, and also the idea of migratory animals could also help us not only to see them as national heralds, national birds, but maybe also as allow us to rethink what our common rights and responsibilities mean in a world where more and more people are on the run and don't have a nation state to support them, or they don't have, or animals who don't have a nation state who says, this is an important heritage animal, so we will save it. But what about the ugly, the seemingly non-functional animals?
Thank you very much. I mean, there are so many other things to talk about, but we're running out of time. Actually, we have ran out of time some time ago, but people have been very patient. So, any last thoughts that you want to just throw out of the table before we say goodbye? It's also okay if there aren't.
Good. I would just say congratulations to Elisa, and thanks to everybody for sharing all your time with us, also there in Den Haag. Yeah, it was really nice and lots to follow up on.
Absolutely.
I will do the same. I will join Jol's thanks, and thank you all and thank you, Elisa, and thank you, Bruno, for this, and Fahim for the amazing talk and comments. I would stay like forever speaking about all these things, but I'm sure we will have more time in the future. Thank you, everyone, also for being there.
Thank you, everyone. It's also so interesting that the dream, I cannot stop myself, that the dreams came as a recurrent topic, no?
It's funny because I would like to conclude by showing a very small fragment, like a video fragment of the sleeping falcons, which we stayed. It's funny because it's so difficult to film sleeping falcons. They are always awake. So we stayed up until 3 a.m. to try to do that. So maybe while we conclude, let's just see some sleeping falcons.
That's a perfect way of concluding. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, West and Elisa, and you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
And now, sleeping falcon.
So let's see, Zoom, where is it?
Thank you. Have a good afternoon. Have a good Sunday, everyone.